Three key takeaways from One Nation Under AARP are, first of all, age is going to be, I think, a major variable in politics from here on out. Age really has not been before. The senior vote has basically been a sleeping giant so far. It's been divided by all the other variables, race, ethnicity, class, education, all those things. But I think from here on out, with Medicare and Social Security on the cutting table, I think age is going to be a major political variable. Second is going to be the question of leadership. Who is going to lead the defense of Medicare and Social Security, or at least determine how deep are the cuts going to go and what kind of cuts and reforms are we going to have with these two giant entitlement programs. Third, it's going to be very, very interesting to watch AARP, because they're trying to avoid being labeled as the greedy geezer organization, which a lot of people in Washington do label them that. And so they really have a multi-generational agenda. They're already researching the next generation coming up after the boomers. They do a lot of work awarding grants and scholarships to inner city schools. A lot of their ads emphasize that AARP is for everyone who's had a birthday. AARP is for all generations. And so that's one reason I called the book One Nation Under AARP, is they're trying to get more multi-generational, multicultural, and not just be for, greedy geezers, quote unquote. Well, when I first started out, all this was conjecture, so I started going to Washington, D.C. primarily to interview politicians, experts on the baby boomer, of whom there were very few, to get a general portrait of baby boomers. Who was this bunch? And I kept going back over and over again to AARP, because as I discovered, nobody knows boomers like AARP. We are their next constituency. We are their constituency now. And they had a lot of good data and a lot of sharp people who had good insights on boomers. So I began to put together a portrait of boomers. We're about 78 million people. We're mostly white, but other than that, we're pretty diverse economically, occupationally, educationally, marital status, religion, all those variables. But there was an underlying social cohesion or common history that we had, the soundtrack of our lives of the 1950s and 60s, good old rock and roll, as well as television. We are the television generation, so we were programmed pretty well by the big three networks. And there's evidence of that today in the big nostalgia industry, which sells all those remastered CDs and all those DVDs of the television sitcoms of the era. So there's that form of cultural cohesion. Also, boomers are fairly well united around values of individualism. Do your own thing, let me do it my way, let me have my pull-down menus and choices. And we're also a pretty optimistic generation, even still. One of the AARP officers I interviewed said, boomers always think there's one more tomorrow. But on the other hand, our two boomer presidents so far, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, suggest we are a kind of a Janus-faced or a divided generation. As Bill Clinton said, if you like the 1960s, you're probably a liberal. If you didn't like the 60s, then you're probably conservative. And of course, we fought the culture wars for the past several decades over a lot of issues sort of based around, did you like the 60s or didn't you? Barack Obama, of course, in 2008 promised to take us beyond these boomer culture wars, and instead in the Democratic primaries in the general election, we found that the culture wars had taken economic root. And now we're part of the response to globalization. And the professional, upper middle class, well-educated people, many of them have been just fine with globalization. They've done well by it. They're at home with multiculturalism, mass immigration, international affairs, and they welcome this new order. Bill Clinton and Bill Gates, both boomers, are spokesmen for this new order. On the other hand, you have a lot of middle-class and working-class Americans, particularly white, particularly in the Midwest, South, and some parts of the Southwest, who have been hurt by globalization, and they feel threatened by it. And their spokesmen have tended to be populists like Sarah Palin and some of the talk radio hosts, some of the people on Fox News. And they voted for Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primaries, and they voted for John McCain in the general election. And these political differences, rooted again in the response to globalization, have kept going in the post-election period. You have a lot of baby boomers, including Barack Obama's former foe, Hillary Clinton, active in his administration and still supporting him. But the most explosive and visible manifestation of boomer politics that we have today is the Tea Party movement, which is largely made up of boomers. They're very fiscally conservative, some cultural conservatism there, but very, very big on cutting the budget. Unless you mention cutting Social Security and Medicare. And a lot of the recent polling data and interviews with Tea Party people indicate Medicare and Social Security are just fine with them. 70% say don't cut it. Now, this may be due to the fact that at least half of baby boomers are not financially prepared for retirement, and they're increasingly aware of it. So what we have here is a very interesting situation in terms of the formation of a potential voting bloc and political or social movement that is largely age-based. What I'm wondering is whether boomers will form a more cohesive voting bloc, very, very attuned to the different proposals on Social Security and Medicare. As we're beginning to see right now, you have Congressman Ryan's proposals that, again, try not to harm those over 55. And yet there are still some boomer segments under 55, and just rattling the saber on Medicare and Social Security, I think, should make people sit up and take notice. You have particularly the older half of the baby boom generation with some degree of cultural cohesion and affinity. There are some political divisions, but they're economically threatened, and they obviously like and support Medicare and Social Security. So what is going to happen? The one thing that is lacking here is a leader. One of the most interesting findings of my years of research on this topic is that no one I spoke to could think of a person who symbolized or was a leader or a potential leader for the baby boomers. Just basically people drew a blank when I asked that question. The one organization, chance favors the prepared mind, the one organization that stands ready to be the tribune of the boomers is 40 million member AARP, which has a great research unit. They're very politically astute. They've got a good policy advocacy unit. They are trying to make themselves into a more multi-generational, multicultural organization, so they won't be stereotyped as the Greedy Geezer organization. But there's no question that of the organizations in DC, anybody that you can really think of, AARP is probably the most likely to try and minimize the cuts to Social Security and Medicare. So insofar as boomers are looking for an all-in-one ally, AARP is it. I think what the major parties have to do in terms of looking at the boomer vote is to do some balancing. You can see that already with the Republicans offer some pretty hard-edged reforms in terms of Medicare. Now, Social Security is not quite on the table. That was studied by a special commission set up by President Obama. But I think with regard to Medicare and Social Security, again, it's going to be a dance of how deep the cuts, when are the cuts going. Another big debate is should senior citizens, either now or in the future, be dependent on private insurance? Should we have consumer-driven health care? People going shopping for insurance when they're 70, 75, or 80. I think a lot of boomers are learning about old age by taking care of their parents, by the way. And I think a lot of people would say, you know, the free market is fine, it's good, but when you get to be 75 or 80, maybe it's good to have a government-defined, benefit that you don't have to go shopping for and be able to fight with the insurance companies. And where we're going to go from here is going to be a very interesting story.